On Wednesday morning, March 18th, 2026, Donald Trump posted a question on Truth Social. Not a policy announcement, not a military briefing, a question. He wrote, "I wonder what would happen if we finished off what's left of the Iranian terror state and let the countries that use it, we don't, be responsible for the so-called Strait. That would get some of our non-responsive allies in gear, and fast." He misspelled straight. He reposted with the correction minutes later. The typo barely matters. What matters is that the sitting president of the United States, 3 weeks into the most expensive American military engagement since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, is now floating the total annihilation of an entire state on social media as a bargaining chip with his own allies. Let that sentence land. Over the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly what is behind that post, why the coalition Trump thought he had built has completely collapsed around him, and why the person in Tehran reading that message just rejected every ceasefire offer on the table before the ink was even dry. Before we continue, thanks for tuning in. Your support is what keeps this channel running, and I genuinely appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe and hit like so more people get access to this coverage. Here is the sequence of events that led to that Truth Social post. It starts with the Strait of Hormuz. When the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28th, one of the few things Western planners acknowledged as a serious risk was Iranian retaliation through the strait. Around 20% of the world's oil passes through that 21-mile-wide choke point. Iran threatened to close it, and then it did. By March 1st, tanker traffic had effectively collapsed. Within a week, Brent crude was above $100 a barrel for the first time since 2022. By Monday, March 16th, Brent sat at $104.84. On Wednesday morning, after Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field, oil spiked nearly 5% to almost $110 a barrel. Marine traffic data showed only 15 vessels transiting the strait over a 3-day window. For context, on a normal day, around 100 vessels make that crossing. Trump's problem is simple and structural. The United States is an oil exporter. The countries most devastated by the Hormuz closure are China, Japan, South Korea, India, and most of Western Europe. 20 million barrels per day flow through that waterway. Around 84% of it goes to Asian markets. America does not need the strait the way its allies do. So when Trump asked those allies to send warships to reopen it, he was asking them to go to war to solve a problem that originated from a war they did not start, were not consulted about, and do not want. The response was swift and damning. Germany said no. Japan said any deployment would face high hurdles. Australia declined. Luxembourg said no. Spain's defense minister said her country would never accept stopgap measures to keep the strait open, adding that the objective must be for the war to end now. Italy's foreign minister said diplomacy needed to prevail. Even Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who Trump had publicly praised, said the United Kingdom would not be drawn into the wider war. Axios reported that sources familiar with the diplomatic talks described responses from several NATO members ranging from skepticism to, in their exact framing, hell no. Trump's reaction over the course of 72 hours tells you everything. On Saturday, he announced that many countries would be sending warships in conjunction with the United States. On Sunday, he warned that NATO would have a very bad future if members did not help. On Monday, he said the US was talking to about 7 countries but declined to name them. On Tuesday, he declared that the US never needed help and did not want it. And on Wednesday, he suggested finishing off Iran entirely and abandoning the strait to whoever relies on it. In a single week, the president moved from coalition building to threatening annihilation of an entire nation, all because remaining after the assassination of the supreme leader. He attended the Al-Quds Day March in Tehran publicly on March 13th. 4 days later, Israel killed him in an overnight strike, along with his son, the head of his office, and several guards. Iran also confirmed the killing of Gholam Reza Soleimani, the commander of Iran's besieged militia force, the same day. Then, hours later, Iran confirmed a third death within 24 hours. Intelligence Minister Ismail Khatib, 3 of the most senior figures in the Iranian security apparatus, eliminated in a single day. And the IRGC's response was to fire cluster munitions at Tel Aviv. 2 people were killed in their apartment in Ramat Gan, a man and a woman. The missiles also hit a train station in central Tel Aviv. Iran announced the strikes explicitly as retaliation for Larijani and Soleimani. Trita Parsi, a political analyst at the Quincy Institute, told Democracy Now! That Larijani was the one person the international community could meaningfully talk to. Without him, Parsi said, it is difficult to see who there is to speak with inside the Iranian system, adding that whoever remains within the bureaucracy now tends to be the more hardline figures who also see a benefit in prolonging the war, not ending it. That is the strategic picture on the ground when Trump posts about finishing off Iran. He is suggesting total annihilation of a country whose new leader has just rejected ceasefire proposals, whose pragmatic middlemen are being systematically killed, and whose missile arsenal continues to reach Israeli cities 18 days into a campaign originally projected to wrap up in 4 to 6 weeks. The economic damage is now outrunning both the military objectives and the political messaging. American gasoline prices have risen 74 cents per gallon since the war started. The national average hit $3.72 per gallon, the highest since October 2023. California surpassed $5 per gallon. Diesel climbed $1.24. This is the single largest monthly increase in US gasoline prices since Hurricane Katrina. Trump spent his entire second term's early months pointing to gas prices falling below $3 a gallon in December as a proof point of economic competence. That number is now gone, and it is not coming back unless the strait reopens. The International Energy Agency, in the largest coordinated drawdown in its history, announced that 32 member nations would collectively release 412 million barrels from emergency reserves. The United States alone committed 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The announcement failed to move prices down. Brent stayed above $100. On Wednesday, it hit $110. Goldman Sachs has raised its forecasts repeatedly. Deutsche Bank's head of macro research wrote that markets are still concerned about further escalation, and with each passing day, investors have moved to price in a more protracted conflict. And the military campaign itself is generating its own contradictions. The first 6 days of operations cost over $11.3 billion, making it the most expensive American military engagement since the opening phase of the Iraq invasion. More than 130 cities across Iran have been struck. Israel carried out at least 200 strikes on Iran on a single Sunday and claimed to have thousands of targets remaining. The Pentagon has acknowledged it does not have a complete picture of all Iranian launchers still operational. Iran has launched more than 500 ballistic missiles and 2,000 drones since February 28th. At least 16 American military installations across the Gulf region have been damaged, according to a New York Times analysis verified through satellite imagery and official statements. 7 American service members are dead. At least 2,000 people inside Iran have been killed, including children. And now, on day 18, the same day Trump is posting about finishing off the Iranian state on social media, Israel strikes Iran's South Pars gas field. Iran shares that field with Qatar, and Qatar uses its side to supply roughly 1/5 of the world's LNG exports. Qatar's foreign ministry called it a dangerous and irresponsible step. Iran published a list of energy facilities in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar that it intends to strike next, naming the Aramco Samref refinery and the Al Hosn gas field by name. This is not a war that is winding down. This is a war that is widening. Now hold all of that against the question Trump actually asked Wednesday morning. He did not announce an operation. He did not issue a military directive. He posted a hypothetical, a rhetorical question designed to spook allied governments into cooperating with his Hormuz coalition by threatening to make things worse if they do not. The problem is that the audience for that message is not just European foreign ministries, it is Tehran. And in Tehran, the message was received by a new supreme leader who has already rejected every peace proposal, whose most moderate senior official was just killed, whose intelligence minister was killed hours later, and whose official position is that the right time for negotiations is after the United States and Israel accept defeat and pay compensation. Finishing off Iran, whatever that phrase actually means in operational terms, is not a threat that produces capitulation from a government that has already decided it does not want peace on any terms short of total adversary humiliation. It is a phrase that removes any remaining diplomatic window and hands the hardliners in Tehran exactly the narrative they need to sustain popular resistance. The assessment the National Intelligence Council gave before the first bomb fell remains the most accurate description of this conflict available. Regime change is unlikely. The regime has not fractured. It has promoted from within, issued commands under fire, launched retaliatory missiles daily for 18 days, survived the assassination of its supreme leader, and installed a successor who is more hardline than the man he replaced. Neither government has defined what an acceptable end to this conflict looks like. Trump's post on Wednesday is not a strategy. It is a pressure tactic aimed at his own allies, deployed in a moment of visible frustration, delivered in a format that is simultaneously being read in London, Tokyo, Brussels, and Tehran. And none of those capitals are reading it the same way. That is not a war with a political objective still on the table. That is a war that has already outlived the assumptions it was built on, with an energy crisis accelerating underneath it, an internal resignation at the top of the US counterterrorism apparatus. And now pay attention to what is happening inside the Trump administration at the same time, because it is the most significant crack in the war's domestic foundation yet. On Tuesday, March 17th, Joe Kent, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, resigned. He is the highest-ranking Trump administration official to publicly oppose the war. Kent was a Green Beret, a CIA paramilitary officer, a Trump loyalist who had backed the president through 2 elections and served under Tulsi Gabbard at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. He wrote his resignation letter to Trump directly, and his exact words were, "I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby." He went further. He accused Israeli officials of running a deliberate pressure campaign to deceive the president into supporting the war. And he urged Trump to reflect on what we are doing in Iran and who we are doing it for. The White House press secretary called the claim that Israel pressured Trump insulting and laughable. Trump told reporters in the Oval Office that Kent was a nice guy, but weak on security. One senior White House official described Kent as a suspected leaker who had already been cut out of presidential briefings. What makes this resignation genuinely significant is not the politics around it. It is the institution Kent led. The National Counterterrorism Center is responsible for the entire US government's intelligence on terrorist threats. It maintains the database of every known and suspected terrorist actor. And while the war is ongoing, while ballistic missiles are landing inside Israel and drone strikes are hitting Gulf infrastructure, that center is now without a director. That is not a footnote. That is a structural gap in the national security architecture of a country actively at war. There is a second assessment worth noting. The National Intelligence Council, representing the consensus view of all major American intelligence agencies, completed a report before the first bomb dropped that concluded regime change in Iran was unlikely, regardless of the scale of the military campaign. Multiple follow-up assessments have reached the same conclusion. A senior Israeli official privately told Reuters there is no certainty the war will lead to the collapse of the clerical government. And yet the war continues, with no publicly articulated alternative objective. Because the regime did not collapse, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed on the first day of the war. Within 8 days, the Assembly of Experts convened and selected his son, Mujtaba Khamenei, as the new supreme leader. Analysts describe the 56-year-old as more hardline than his father. The clerical body reportedly selected him based on guidance that the next leader should be, in their framing, hated by the enemy. No photographs of him have been released since his selection. No public video appearances. US officials have suggested he may have suffered severe injuries in the strikes that killed his father. Some Iranian officials have said his injuries were minor. His exact condition is unknown, but what is confirmed is that he has been issuing orders. On March 17th, Reuters reported that 2 intermediary countries had conveyed ceasefire proposals to Iran's foreign ministry. Mojtaba Khamenei rejected every single one. A senior Iranian official who asked not to be identified said the new supreme leader took a stance that was very tough and serious. His position, conveyed after his first foreign policy session since taking power, was that it was not the right time for peace until the United States and Israel are brought to their knees.